Good evening and welcome to Happy Hour, brought to you by NAP, the National Association of Adoptees and Parents. It is our mission to unify the adoption community and elevate our diverse voices by promoting dialogue, understanding, and healing through education, awareness, and connections. I'm Jennifer Fahlsing, co-founder and vice president, and your guest host this evening. We are happy that you have joined us this week. Please leave us a message in the chat. Let us know where you're from, what part of the constellation, and if this is your first happy hour. We are, like I said, we're so grateful to have you here. Tonight, we have a couple of announcements. We'll run through those here real quick, and then we'll do the upcoming programs at the end. So please remain on mute. Raise your hand on the screen, or you can just stop in the window closed. Interesting. Let's try that again. Well, that was quite interesting. Here we go. You can raise your hand on screen or the virtual hand to be recognized. You can also post your comments or questions in the chat, or you can send them privately to myself or to Beth if there's a question you would like to have asked privately. This is a public meeting with no guarantee that information or identity is confidential. We record the presentation part of this event, so up until like 8 o'clock, and that is shared in our private happy hour group on Facebook and on our YouTube channel. And just a reminder, if you are experiencing a serious mental health event or suicidal thoughts, please contact a licensed professional or the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline, and their new number is just 988. So with that, let me introduce Cynthia to you. So Cynthia is a former American Adoption Congress, A.A.C, board member, serving as president, treasurer, and conference chair. Cynthia is a national presenter and speaker on foster care, adoption, birth mother trauma, and positive psychology. As the president and conference chair of A.A.C, Cynthia ensured all the adoption triad voices were represented and elevated within the conference programs. Cynthia worked with many triad members to address the trauma and issues that impacted the adoption and foster community. Cynthia's dream is for the adoption and foster community members to have a safe place to collaborate in their healing and growth and shared ideas. Cynthia shares her personal story as an alumni of foster care and a birth mother of a 39-year-old son. Cynthia spent 6 years in foster care and lived in 5 foster homes. At 18, she aged out of foster care, pregnant and homeless. Cynthia was forced and coerced to place her son for adoption by social service professionals as they marginalized her as a foster child and made her unable to provide for her son. After placing her son for adoption, Cynthia enrolled in junior college and graduated with high honors. Following graduation, Cynthia began a career in accounting and finance, and she just celebrated her 32nd anniversary as a financial associate for Harvard University. While working full-time and raising her 3 daughters with her husband, Jim, Cynthia returned to school in 2007 and obtained her BS in business management in 2012 and graduated in May 2020 with her A.L.M, master's in psychology from Harvard University. Cynthia envisions continually elevating the marginalized voices of the adoption and foster care community. She was recently elected as the treasurer for the Alumni Network of Harvard Women, consisting of 2,000 Harvard women alumni. She also recently obtained her grief educator certificate with David Kessler. Cynthia resides in Massachusetts, where she raised her 3 daughters with her husband of 32 years, and she's the proud grandmother of Fallon and Florence. Welcome, Cynthia.
Thank you. Thank you. That's a big mouthful.
It is, but I know some of you were on last week, and Cynthia kind of went in deep into her story, foster care and what she went through. So we don't want to rehash that. We want to focus a lot more this week on what she learned and getting this grief course, talking about the different types of grief. So we're excited to delve into this a little deeper.
Okay. I'm going to share my screen, and if it's not working, then not working like with the room, then we'll step out of it because I have all my, and we're going to skip by some. I loved how Joyce did that last week. So we're going to skip some slides if we have to. Just tell me if you can see the slideshow.
Yes.
Okay, let's see if we can get it in slideshow mode. It's working. Oh, there we go. Okay. So I call it "Oh Good Grief" because grief is good if we can process it and we have our community to sorry, I need to acknowledge it. Unfortunately, in the adoption community, that does not happen, both for adoptees and birth mothers, and sometimes for adoptive parents too, because they are told that there was a reason they could not have children. But today I'm going to focus on what I learned doing my work. I worked on this for 2 years at Harvard of pulling research on adoptive parents. Along the way, I was getting ready for the Cleveland conference in A.A.C, and I did a survey, and then it was then sent out again in 2015, and over 300 women answered the survey. And so I'll just show you a couple of those slides because I think it's important about how, when we're talking about reuniting with our mothers, our family, I think we have to understand where they've been and how they've been treated and how they've processed this whole journey. I'm talking about, even I placed in 1983, I still experience some of these things. So to heal myself, I volunteered, and that's what we're going to be talking about, is find a meaning and find ways to heal yourself. And one of the things that I found helpful was I took this grief course with David Kessler this summer. Ridge House, many of you might know him, had spoken of it and sent me a link, and I decided to enroll. And at the same time, I was facing the loss of my mother. She had died, she was actively dying throughout the course. So the course helped me in that way. But I think sometimes we forget that birth mothers lost something, but so did adoptees. So let's see. So this was my introduction last week, and you can see that's my son. That was when he was 30, and those are my girls, and that's me graduating from Harvard just this year because it was delayed. So because we did a brief overview of and I won't go into it much, but I have generational trauma. My trauma goes back to my grandmother and my mom living in an orphanage. And because of that, I ended up in foster cares, which impacted and compounded my grief and the grief that I experienced, because I never wanted to be away from my parents. They just did not have the services they needed. And my dad was struggling with alcoholism, and my mom was raised in orphanages till the age of 14. And when she did go live with her family, she was severely beaten. And so was I. So that didn't help anything. So while I was in foster care, I found out I was pregnant and placed my child. So we know grief is a psychological and somatic symptomatology process that follows the loss of something or something meaningful to the griever. It can be a dog. I lost my cat this year. My dog has cancer. So typical grief counseling facilitates mourning and highlights the importance of celebrating the loss of the individual with rituals, acceptance of the loss, and adjustment to life. According to Brzezinski, for an individual to have a healthy grieving process, they should be allowed to process grief with rituals or commemorations. This did not happen for me, and I can speak for a lot of other women that we didn't have the chance to grieve. We might have mourned, we probably mourned, but we were told to bury that. We were told not to deal with that our child would be better off. I was told to forget my child, and I know I'm not alone in what I've heard. So I'm not going to read all this. How does grief impact our journeys? It's because we weren't afforded the right to grieve our child. So because of that, the grief does not allow always for a successful reunion, because we were told to forget about this baby. We were told that we weren't really having grief, that we should be happy that our child is going to a 2-parent home. And that's exactly what my son wanted me to say to him, that I was happy that he was placed. And I couldn't, according to Joyce, I told the truth all along. I had done my early counseling with Joyce's group, and that really helped me to set the pace of being honesty about my feelings and trying to be respectful of my son's feelings. So research highlights the adverse experience by many mothers, including guilt, shame, negative self-image, difficulty in intimate relationships, challenges in parenting with subsequent children, anxiety, and trauma. So that was information that I used for my capstone at Harvard. We would like grief to look like the left side of the screen, but really a while grief looks like the right side, along with our adoption journey looks like the right side. There's no straight path. It has ups and downs. I've heard people refer to it as a dance, and grief is not what's going on inside. So it's what's going on inside us, whereas mourning is the process of people coming together to plan a funeral. But grief is a process, not an event. So that means we have to go through steps to get to the other side. There's a lot of different types of grief. There's delayed grief, which grief is you don't process it right away. Inconclusive grief, when there's no body and you can't really, somebody's lost. Anticipatory grief, that's what I felt for my mom. I could see her actively dying, so I was grieving her before she actually died. Secondary losses are losses that we might lose because of the original grief. So for adoptees, this would be something like losing your siblings, losing grandparents. It's that secondary loss, not just losing the loss of your mother. Collective and public grief is more like something like down south where they had the hurricane. We all grieve for the people that were lost. We all grieve for what they lost, even pets or whatever. And then cumulative grief is when you have when somebody experienced multiple losses, like experienced my mother that just passed, but now I have to re-experience my father-in-law passing because we're just having the services now. What I've looked at was in my capstone was disenfranchised grief and complicated grief. So I'm going to just talk about that a little bit. Oh, so disenfranchised grief is when the griever perceives their loss is unwitnessed and unable to share their grief, and it leads to disenfranchised grief. Disenfranchised grief can have profound and lifelong impacts on the physical, mental, psychological health of an individual. The detrimental effects of disenfranchised grief include worthlessness, isolation, and inability to concentrate, anger, lack of validation, and psychological stress. The relationship is not recognized as significant, so the person's grief seems disproportionate. It's like we were told that we weren't even supposed to talk about it. I couldn't talk to anybody about it. I went to school, and luckily some of my friends did ask, but it still was not the same as your family comforting you when you lose somebody. It's so important to have that around you, to hold you and comfort you and support you and help you through those stages. Complicated grief is more, it includes more as excessive avoiding reminders of loss. I know lots of women, including myself, that refuse to go to baby showers for years and obsessively thinking about their loss, intense logging of the person who has died. I still have my diary from that year that I lost my son. And I remember I was in school and I was just so distraught and I had nobody to turn to. On the way back, I had started school 3 weeks after somebody's coming in 3 weeks after I placed my son, after I had my son, and I had to go back and sign the paperwork. And on the ride back to school, I went with the social workers. They volunteered. I should know better. And they said that, why are you crying? You can have other children. They cannot. You should be happy for your child. And it's like, I thought it was just so insane for somebody to say that, but that's what everybody was saying around me. So how would you know that you can grieve that loss? How do you feel comfortable with that? You feel a sense of loss of purpose in life, excessively seeking reminders of things. I mean, I would write my son a letter every year on his birthday. And some women had suicidal thoughts, being unable to access that the loss has occurred. I know hundreds of times I thought, how can I run back and get my son? and you would experience persistent intrusive thoughts. The research highlights that the loss did not diminish for birth mothers, one of the studies I read, but that it increased with intensity as we got older and as we moved further away from the loss. I know for me, it took a lot for me to come to a point where it doesn't consume me. And I had to do some things to make that. And that's what we're going to talk about, is how did I do those things to make it not so present. I remember at times that I just would hate Mother's Day, just would hate it. But I have 3 other children. So I had to find ways to get around that so that I could live fully here. So 50% of birth mothers in the study by Baden and Wiley, they lost their child, the child that was lost 30 years later post relinquishment, was still having feelings for and not process that grief. Validation of grief allows a person to experience the cycle of grief and process their feelings. When grief is not validated by others, the grieving process is interrupted and people are unable to process their emotions. People may be also internalize lack of validation as internal conflict and minimize their own feelings. I know at times I would question, why do I feel this way? And I should just get on with it, like people were saying. So David Kessler had the 6 needs of grieving, and they are to have your pain witnessed, to express your feelings, to release the burden of guilt, to integrate the pain and the love, to be free of old wounds, and to find meaning after the loss. So this is in his book, and this is what we practice for 12 weeks, different steps of how to, and obviously I won't be speaking of all of them. I'm just checking my timer. And so that, but I will be giving you a little highlight, hopefully. So what are old wounds? When we take a holistic approach to grieve, old wounds will surface. How do we sabotage our healing when we do not heal our old wounds? So in the session last week, when we were in Indiana, I have people write a loss inventory, and you can do this on your own too. Sometimes we stay stuck in our lives unless we look directly at the ways we've been wounded and grieved. This exercise of listing our own wounds, it's what you have loved and lost and hurt and disappointments and in betrayal, so that we're not repeating some of the steps with some of our own wounds. I know for me, my mom and my dad was an old wound, and I really had to go back and look at those feelings around that and try to process that, or I would continually be stuck in the old wound of leaving them, and also the pain of that and the pain around what happened. When the losses in your life endured in your life that stand out from you, the earliest memory, the present, what has made you sad, what has broken your heart, and what has left a gap in your life? What do the goodbyes bring up for you? There is no right or wrong way to do this. So what I had people do is name their loss, the type of loss. So was it disenfranchised grief? Was it complicated grief? What year it was, and how was their grief witnessed? And then I would suggest that you could do this at any point, and then to keep a notebook of what that grief feels like when you visit it. Is there a way to find meaning around it? And we'll talk about how to find meaning. And to really look at it. I know for me, many people would say it was best that I was without my parents, but I was distraught. I'd lost 6 years with my mom, and if my mom and dad had help, they probably, or even somebody to talk to them about what happened, we probably wouldn't have lost that. But losing those and not revisiting the trauma, I really buried it. Most recently, my childhood friend came back in my life, and we've had off and on contact, and she talked about the extreme abuse I had experienced, and I totally buried it. And at this point, it was good to revisit that, because I know how much forgiveness I've given to my mom without asking for anything back. I know how much I've healed on my road to know the person I reunited with back when I was 21. we were different people and we had changed in the last 35 years, and we had a beautiful relationship. But if I did do healing back then. I just forget a lot of it too. But internally I did healing when I was in my earlier 20s. So I forgot about that abuse. I forgot how bad it was. And when she reminded me, it reminded me of how much I've grown and how much I've relied on some tools to help me be here where I am now today. It wasn't easy, I'm going to tell you that. So I don't, if you're new here or if you're just new to reunion, it takes time. It takes a lot of workshops. I've attended hundreds and hundreds of workshops and conferences. I'm glad they're starting up again. And I've met tons of people along the way that have helped me with that. So it's not something that happens overnight. You have to make intentional activities and you have to make those steps. And listen, I found a lot of my work around healing was attending adoptee workshops. I'm married to an adoptee and my son's an adoptee. I needed to have a better understanding of them so I could hear words that my son had to say when he said them in his voice and not have anger or disappointment or feel that I was rejected again. So quickly, I just wanted to show you a couple of slides about the women that answered the survey, just to have a clear understanding. These women were from the baby scoop era or 1940s all the way up to 1990 when I did it. And a lot of them didn't have contact with their family when they were grieving. So how could they grieve? Or how could they feel they had the support when they placed their son? So you can see that's almost over 80% did not have contact, meaning they probably went to a home or a family. And we were all, almost 80% of us were told to forget our child. So again, we were having that same dialogue. Did anyone acknowledge your grief? The most important thing here, over 85%, nobody acknowledged their grief. Nobody said to them, it's okay. How can I help you? That's a lot of people. And this was a small snapshot. Obviously, this does not, and this isn't everybody. We know that there's other people that might feel differently. For the majority of the people, now I got this wrong last week, so let's go through this again. So this was their first child for almost all the people. Imagine this is your first experience having a baby. How horrendous to lose a baby and not be comforted. We've learned so much about women who've lost babies through miscarriage. Did you mourn your child? So people were mourning their child, but they didn't feel confident in their grief. So that's a huge thing. So they were mourning, they were missing their child, but they weren't being comforted. So again, their grief was being disenfranchised. And almost 70% of us never received counseling. So how do we know what to do at 19? How do we know back then? And this is the thing, when we think about grieving and we think back to people, we have to think where society was at that time. It's easy to say, well, she should have known now. I mean, we're in a different world now, but back then, this is how we viewed society, that these women were told to go on with their life, and they tried. They probably tried, but I have a lot. There were over 40 questions about alcohol, suicide, but obviously we don't have time for all that. But I think it's interesting to see what a snapshot of a population looks like and how they were treated and how it might impact how your reunion should go. If they haven't had counseling still today and they haven't dealt with why their grief is, some people didn't even know they had grief. I remember talking to a social worker who said that some of the foster mothers that she dealt, or the mothers that lost children to foster care, they didn't even know that they were losing their children. They didn't even know that that was what it is until sometimes we explain it. And especially, I can't imagine explaining this to my teenager child that, and we've had the conversations here, but if you didn't have that and you didn't talk about it, it really didn't lead you to heal in your grief. So Evelyn Robinson wrote, the loss of a child through adoption is usually a loss which cannot be openly acknowledged, which is why mothers often suffer in silence. Losing a child through adoption is seldom publicly mourned because everyone is so busy pretending that it has not happened, and it's certainly not socially supported. Traditionally, community supports has been very much in favor of adoption, which we all realized that was true. A lot of I was basically told I couldn't capably handle my child. One fact I do want to share is that my mom and dad did offer to share, help me raise my child, but at that time I had to process the trauma of what happened in that house. So how could I bring a child back into that house? It was very complicated for me and very traumatizing. And I thought I was doing the best interest for my son because that's what everybody was telling me, except for my parents. And at that time, I didn't know if I could trust what they were telling me, but they were good people. They very were. Okay, so one of the things that we also need to look at in the adoption, in grief, is feelings. We must feel our feelings from the inside. You can't heal what you don't feel. We often don't fully feel our feelings. Our feelings must have life. No feeling is final. We move away from the pain, the feelings associated with them. We don't have a broken head, but a broken heart. And individual loss is the worst loss. We cannot meet the individuals where they are. So when I say that an individual's loss is the worst loss, so my loss is my worst loss. Jennifer's loss is her worst loss. There's no competition here. Me losing my mother and Jennifer losing her mother are the same thing. But to me, so to recognize somebody's loss as true and not compete is really important in the adoption world, really important. There's no competition here. We all have lost something dear and great, and we need to recognize that. But we also need to feel it. If we can't feel it, we can't heal it. So recognizing your feelings and writing them down is very important. In the so this is the feeling wheel. You can't see it that good, but if you look them up on the internet, they're all over the internet. And this was one of the things we did in David's class. And it was really telling. So what you need is, what is your go-to feeling? What feeling do you feel the most? Like, is it anger? Is it sadness? And then what is the feeling you reject? I reject love. So, I mean, that's very telling. I'm afraid that people won't love me. You know, I'm not that we now have a family and stuff like that, but that was my feeling for a long time. So acknowledge your feelings, even in everyday life, like, oh, carrying a journal and start writing it down and trying to understand what makes you happy and sad. And when you recognize what makes you happy and sad, you can move to those feelings and those experiences to get through the loss that you experience, the trauma you experience, the grief you experience. So for me, playing with my grandchildren is one of the funnest things. Today, my granddaughter kept saying to me, called me and said, it's the day. This is the day. I didn't know what she was saying. It was picture day. And picture day was very important to Fallon. And it was she's 3.5. I know picture day when she's 13 will not be as fun. So we try to enjoy the joy that she's having today and try to enjoy that with her. I mean, I have a lot on my mind with my mom and my dad, my father-in-law, and I think of my mom most when it's quiet and alone. And we'll go through that. You need to feel those feelings also. But I also know what can make me more happier. And so I move towards those when the pain gets too great. Just like when I was not celebrating Mother's Day. That was too great. I was losing that opportunity with my children. So instead, every year I planted a rose bush. I have a lot of rose bushes right now. So that gave me joy. So for my son, so when the roses grow, I see something pretty and it reminds me of him, and it's pretty. What do you feel about your adoption journey or reunion today? Or how do you feel today? So thinking about how you feel, do you feel happy today? Do you feel sad? Is there something that made you more happy yesterday? And sometimes we do have to feel those sad feelings to remind us there's happy too. So birth mothers felt some shame by society, by themselves, and by their peers. I know I felt very shamed that I will never forget the day that I walked out of the nursing home, the hospital, the doors closed behind me and I wanted to run back. It took me many years to forgive myself for leaving my child, many years. And we'll talk about forgiveness. And it took me many years to see forgiveness in my parents. So forgiveness is a big thing also. These are all part of the positive psychology framework also, which is PERMA. It's positive emotions, engagement, meaning, relationships, and achievement. And you can look that up. I did a workshop in Indiana on that. And those are about intentional activities you do in each of those frameworks. And that's what my capstone focused on. I took my conference experience from American Adoption Congress, and I developed a whole conference on how birth mothers could use the positive psychology framework to help increase their positive emotions. So when we hear somebody tell them their story, we want to be very intentional in listening to them, and we want to acknowledge their grief and not say, well, I got another story. You want to sit with that person and listen to them tell their story. It was very difficult. We for the first 3 weeks in our grief educated course, we would go into labs and we were not allowed to comment on what people were telling us, because there's more healing in sometimes in silence and not sharing. Well, I know a good book. I know this, I know that. This is how I did it. I remember I was at one of my first A.A.C conferences, and I was telling my story about my son in one of the after support groups, and somebody decided to tell me how I should tell my son how he should call me, that he should call me my mother. His mother, I should make him call me his mother. That would not have been great advice for my situation, because that's not how he feels. And she didn't mean it meanly, so and I don't remember who it was. So she was trying to share with me, but sometimes it's better if we have empathy, sympathy, and compassion, and we just sit and allow people to discuss their grief. And that way we're able to witness their loss, and then we start the healing process for that person who might not have ever had an opportunity to share their journey. So confabulation, that was the word here in our house for a while. And this is so easy to do. So confabulation refers to the production of creation of false erroneous memories without the intent to deceive, sometimes called honest lying. Eternally, confabulation is a falsification of a memory by a person who believes he or she is generally communicating truthful meanings. So that means, first of all, we are told lots of lies around adoption, lots of lies. So we start to believe them. We start to believe that we weren't going to be good parents. We start to believe that our child was better off. And then we start to believe that they're not communicating because they don't love you. So my son, about 3 years ago, told me that he loved me. But unfortunately, he could not have a relationship with me because it was too hard. Now, the old Cindy could have heard that as rejection. The new Cindy, who's done her work and listened to many adoptees, and know that he's communicating his voice that I haven't heard for over 33 years. He's telling me exactly what he's feeling. It's too hard. It's not that he doesn't love me. It's not that he doesn't care about me. The relationship is too hard. And don't we all know this adoption journey is not easy. What I didn't tell Jennifer in my bio is that I have 2 other grandchildren. He has 2 children. So I have 4 grandchildren. So it's very hard to continue this generational trauma, because I know 2 other grandchildren that would get along with them fabulously. And these 4 full-blood siblings and cousins have lost a relationship because of a decision I made over 39 years ago. So it's hard to take, and it's hard to find hope in that. but that's what we need to do. But first, we need to know self-compassion. We need to understand when we're not in a support group and we're down in the dumps and we're feeling that pain that's so around us and consumes us, because this is part of our life. Somebody made decisions for us. Somebody didn't believe us. Somebody didn't support us. So when we have self-compassion for ourselves, we're able to take ourselves and be that person that, so first we sit down and on this perspective of the critic, and that would be me saying, geez, he doesn't love you. He really doesn't love you. You know, he doesn't call you. You never see him. You haven't seen him in over 15 years. But then you feel, so then the emotional voice says, I don't feel supported. I feel hurt. But then the person of the friend says, you know what, Cindy, you did what you could at that time. You loved him. And now you know he loves you, but he can't just do it. And someday maybe he'll be able to do it. And someday maybe he won't, but someday maybe you'll meet your grandchildren. So it's that person that leads you through the trauma and helps you in the days that you don't have a support group. I mean, NAP has been wonderful at providing all the different support groups. And sometimes we just need that. We need to sit with ourselves and say, I'm a good person. I made a choice. It was, or in my case, I don't feel I made a choice, but it was a decision. I did sign my name on the paper, and now I have to live with it. And now I have to listen to his voice. And now I have to do what I do. And that is to find hope, And how do I find hope? I do things. For me, it was the way I got involved in the adoption community is I went to Massachusetts in 2008 State House and testified before the state legislator. Well, I had my piece of paper in hand, and this was the only time I did it. I mean, this is the first time I did it. And there I saw Paul Sugarhoots, and some of you know him and some of you don't, but Paul was very instrumental in a lot of the adoption legislation early on, especially New Hampshire. So I approached him and I walked up to him, and the rest is history. I became part of the board member. And for me, I thought I was joining to help people. But what I learned was I was helping myself also. And I was meeting amazing people across the country. I was meeting amazing women that came before me in the baby scoop era that had stepped out of the closet and allowed some of us to step out of the closet, and we're still doing it. And I'm happy to say, I guess the governor signed the Massachusetts bill next week. So for open, yes. So it's a full bill. I have testified about 5 or 6 times over my years, and would do it over and over again. So that's how I found hope, volunteering and reaching out. And I volunteered for a nonprofit with foster alum. It's how I had to find my hope. So we can grieve and live authentically. That means we can do both at the same time. There are moments of sadness, and there's revisited memories of mom that bring me happiness. My mom loved to smile and loved to leave a room smiling. At 94, she was still flirting with the doctors right before she died. So this is what she did. So also journaling, art, all these things help us to go through our loss and live briefly. Playing with my grandchildren help me live authentically. But in the next moment, I could be crying in my car for my mom or my father-in-law. So, and then traveling with your husband. So this is how we have to live. We can't stand still. We can't stop. If I've been there, I've stopped and felt hurt and been on that road. And it does take a while to get there, especially if you newly found your parents. It's the best medicine the best thing I can tell you is attend conferences, read books, attend the NAP happy hour. Those are things that you will start healing from. It will take time, but it will happen. So hope is a big word. It's part of the positive psychology framework. There's a lot of benefit to hope. They've done numerous studies of how it can help you. Now, how could I have hope? I have no idea when I ever see my son again. None. It hasn't been a face-to-face since he was 20 years old. So, I wish someday that I will see my grandchildren, but hope is enhancing about generally goal thoughts. So you set goals for you, as little as they might be. For some people, it's getting out of bed the next day. Hope and having hope. Providing a structure of uncovering goals, coming up with a clear, workable goals, and expand and strengthen pathway thoughts. Looking for hopeful stories, searching for the silver lining in events. So it's looking for, so, okay, so even though I do not have contact with my son, I have, and I guess you're not supposed to say this, I had the opportunity to tell him I love him. I had the opportunity to see him as a man. And thankfully, the last text messages I shared with him in the spring, he sent me pictures of my grandchildren. So I was able to see them as little girls. So that to me, that was so rewarding. I have hope that he'll continue to share those moments with me, even though they're not what I want or what I envisioned. I'll take it. I'll take it, because I know so many that have less than, but even for those less than, there is a way to find hope, helping other adoptees through the sharing your story and how you've overcome, and continuing to support the adoption community, I think is a wonderful way to have hope. And then there's finding meaning. Meaning is relative in purpose. Meaning takes time. We may not find meaning until months or even years later after reunion. Meaning does not equal understanding. Even though we may find meaning, it's still not worth the cost of losing our parents or our children. Meaningful connections will replace painful memories, creating meaning that remembers the loss and honors the life. So even though I don't have my son, the relationships and people I have connected with throughout my, so I was 20-year career here. I don't know if you call it a career, but my 20-year journey has been amazing. One of the first people I met was Joyce Pavo. She has been an amazing influence in my life, and without her, I would not have healed the right way. Joyce was one of the ones that told me not to lie to my children. At the same time that we were finding out about our son, who was 12, my husband was finding his birth family. So Joyce was very instrumental in how I raised my children around adoption. And that my children grew up knowing they had a brother. And it was a very tedious road to telling them that we can't have connection. They had the opportunity to meet him a couple of times, but unfortunately this is not something that he wants right now, and we'll respect that. He hasn't told me not to text him yet, so I'll continue to do that. But how do you find your meaning? My meaning is, continuing on my pathway here. I've joined up to be taking a course in life coaching, and I think that'll be the end of my education. So, because not that I want to make a career out of it, I would love to volunteer with foster youth to help them when times are so tough. We see so many children that struggle, even that aren't in foster care. So if there's a way that I can help them and on their journey, that would make me all the more proud. So finding your meaning is really important. So this is my mom. And so I lost my mom, and she was an amazing woman. She was severely beaten, and she always had a positive outlook. And I guess that's why I know positive psychology works, because this woman really endured a lot. So did my dad, and they were tremendous people, and she always had a smile on her face, no matter her birth mother died in childbirth. So my comfort and my meaning and my hope is that I hope my mom met her mom when she went to heaven. I hope she had that opportunity, because she cried about it for 94 years. So I hope that that's happened, and I'm pretty sure it did. And I'm pretty sure my birth grandmother was an amazing person. So I just want to share a couple of voices with you from my survey about women. There are plenty of them but I just pulled out a few. I was in the hospital giving birth on Christmas and signed papers on New Year's Eve. I avoided holidays ever since reunion, but still, mostly I avoid. I've felt forgotten, thrown away, treated like a criminal, shameful, severely depressed, and very alone, like someone stole my soul. Second one, I couldn't attend any baby showers or events related to the birth of a child. I hated myself and everyone else for what had happened. My grief was complete. I had a jubilation at the age of 26, so I could not have any more children. I felt horrible. I was horrible, and I to have let her go. I went to baby showers of friends and didn't feel comfortable because I couldn't discuss the pregnancy or birth. So I won't read this one, but that I think puts us at almost 45 minutes. It's pretty close. I trimmed it down. So I want to thank you for allowing me to speak. It's been a journey I've been on, and I would rather have my son, but I've met some amazing people that have taught me more than I think I taught them. So thank you for allowing me to share my story. I'll exit out of here.
Yep.
Yeah,
Perfect.
there you go.
Thank you, Cynthia. Couple things I wanted to ask you about. I couldn't see it. Maybe Beth can jump on and Google it and drop it in there about that feelings wheel
Yes.
and the loss inventory. Now we did that. Like I said at our mini meetup last week. But let's talk about that in a little more detail because that went by quickly.
Okay.
So you'd handed out a worksheet and it was name your grief. So if
Yes.
anybody wants to do this, it's name your grief, and then the choices were like disenfranchised grief. What were all the grief choices for them?
Hold on. I have it written down here. I mean, I have the slide here, so I'll just read them out to you. There was delayed grief, which is grief we don't feel in the moment because it's not safe. Inconclusive date grief, that's when there's a missing child, a body that's gone missing. Anticipatory grief, that's when we're expecting somebody to die. A lot of people who have aging parents or people with Alzheimer's will experience this as they're watching their loved one pass and slowly. Secondary loss are losses that we experience that can sometimes be like a divorce and you lose all your friends around the divorce. But for us in the adoption community, I could see that like my son would lose all of his siblings and stuff like that. So it's not only he lost me, if he feels that way, it's not only that he lost me, but he lost his brothers and sisters if he doesn't connect. You know what I mean? So that's and then there's collective and public grief. That's like 9/11 or like the hurricane. What we all feel it. We're all sympathy. So it's we're all acknowledging it. And you know, you meet somebody and say, "Oh, I'm so sorry for your loss," you know. And then cumulative is when you have multiple losses, like if you had a pet die, like my sister did. My mom died and she had to put a dog to sleep on the next day. So that was it for her to collective grief. And then complicated grief, he said that was changing. It's normally grief that lasts more than 6 months. So for us, as the birth mothers, we definitely had complicated grief because most of us didn't have our grief acknowledged. So our grief went for decades, you know, and still is. I mean, nobody sat here and said to me, "Oh, I'm so sorry for your loss." I mean, still waiting. I don't think it's going to happen, but you know, you're hoping that somebody would say that. I mean, I know we do. Birth mother, we say it, and you know, but the rest of the community, like my mom did, and my dad did, but you know, most of our community didn't do that. Traumatic is it's a very difficult, you know, I would say we had traumatic grief where we experience or like a child losing their parents in an awful shooting or something like that. And then disenfranchised is what we talked about. So
Okay, so we are going to column 1. We're going to name a grief, correct?
yes, like a
Okay.
pet or like, so a loss, any loss you had. So for me, my dad ran away when I was younger. He came back, but I lost my father. I remember doing that. And so that was my earliest grief that I can remember. And then I lost a dog that ran away. You know, they don't seem like much, but if you think of them, So when my dog dies, I'll revisit back to the dog that ran away. You know what I mean? It's like if we think about that, we think about how that was a traumatic loss. We we let the dog out to go to the bathroom and he took off. It was a puppy. I still worry what happened to that puppy. I have no idea what happened to that puppy. It was down Cape Cod. He was a beautiful dog. I'm
Okay.
sure somebody picked him up, but you know what I mean? So it's about looking at the old wounds, what brings up. So if somebody had a miscarriage and then they lost their child to adoption, they're going to revisit losing a second baby, you know?
Okay.
So you,
So we're gonna say this is my
mhm,
loss here, and then we're gonna name what kind of grief it is. And you said we
mhm,
were gonna put down what year it happened
yep,
and whether it was witnessed.
yep,
Okay. And then was there any other things to go along with that?
no, that's it.
Okay. So then we've laid all this out on a piece of paper. Then what do we do with that?
Well,
Or
you
we
look at it and you acknowledge it and you're able to witness what had happened and have others and talk about it in a group. So we had gone into
okay.
like breakout rooms and talked about what it
Okay.
was. We talked about what impact that had in our lives.
I think too, it can also help you if you lay this all out on a piece of paper and
Mhm.
it's somewhere where you look at it, it's inside a
Yeah.
cabinet door that you open up and you
Yeah.
glance at it occasionally, you can go, wow, look at everything I've overcome.
Yeah.
You know,
Exactly.
I've worked
Exactly.
on this thing and I've worked on this
Exactly.
thing, and I still have
Exactly.
this list, but I've made progress. I'm healing.
And how did you make that progress? So here you
Yeah.
are. How did you get through that one that you thought was tough? So how did I get through my foster care experience? Well, I reconnected with my parents and I chose to foster that relationship and work on when I got triggered by something my mom might say, because she didn't know, she didn't have like counseling back then and stuff. So we're able to see how we overcome and how our feelings are around that. So on top of that, we're acknowledging what feelings we're having.
Okay. And
Mhm.
then Beth, thank you, Beth. She dropped in a link to the feelings wheel in the chat. So please go there. And this is something we also did last week at the mini meetup. And I don't know. I mean, I'm an adoptee and I'm a first mom, and I have lots and lots of loss and lots of trauma. Even my
Mhm.
adoptive mother left me. But so I always have, and people who are not a part of our community, and when I've said something kind of off the cuff, they're like, whoa, you really think that and you really feel that? But I never expect anybody to stay in my life. I always expect people to leave. And that's been my reality. And I think because of that, that feelings wheel is difficult for me because
Yeah,
I have a hard time naming my
yeah.
feelings because I think that comes from a lifetime of shoving down your feelings, especially
Mhm,
being a mother who lost a child to adoption,
mhm.
forced adoption. So is there a way that that we can work on figuring out what our feelings are and how to name them, work that
What they
wheel?
said is, start a journal. So when you're feeling happy and you can start it's to give you more words around. So if you can't, like, try to get as close as you can to that feeling. So was it sad? And is there a way to get happy from it? Let me just see. There was okay. Hold on. The goal is to be able to tap into your feelings. The feeling reel is used as a guide and a starting point that may help you to describe your experiences. The feelings is used to circumvent memory distortion or inaccurate experiences. You cannot heal what you don't feel. The tool is good to develop self-compassion. Pay attention to the experience that are present, like shame. Like, so maybe you felt shame or and around your experience with your son. So pay attention to that feeling and try to work through, like, maybe you don't feel shame. I mean, I had a hard time forgiving myself. And so it took me many years. I mean, I still haven't totally forgiven myself what happened, but it did take many years and that shame was there. So how can we move from shame to understanding of ourselves? How can we have a self-compassion for ourselves?
Because what you said, you can't heal what you don't
Yeah,
feel. And I
yeah.
know I'm not the only one that has a
Mhm,
hard time identifying those feelings. So
mhm.
I like that, we can journal and through
Yeah,
practice and just
yeah, and
sitting
try
with
to tap
ourselves and
into them.
trying to identify it. You will
Yeah.
refine that over time, I'm assuming.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. I think sometimes we don't know, and this gives you more words. And they said, if you look at the wheel, if you look directly across from one word, so like relax, directly opposite is overwhelmed. So if you look on the wheel, you can see what the opposite is. So maybe if I'm feeling overwhelmed, how can I make myself relax? How can I bring myself, because I know sometimes I get overwhelmed here, I take on too much. So how can I move to that relaxed state? Walk away and shut the door. Sounds like a good idea.
Yeah.
But maybe like this weekend, I'm gonna spend some time reorganizing my home work office again. It seems to creep up on me, so that when I feel overwhelmed because my space is messy, if I clean it, I'll feel relaxed. Do you know what I mean? So if you look at the wheel, I thought that was interesting to look across and see what opposite is. So to move in a direction that's more positive.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, thank you. We have people with their hands up, so I am going to
Oh
stop the
God,
recording
this
and we
becomes
will.
scary. This is how I have to prove that.
Oh, they're all great people. Let me stop this and